the glass shattered against the marble floor of the cafe's stockroom. At the exact moment Elena Wright realized the three men in expensive suits weren't discussing a business merger, they were planning a murder, and their target was the Vampire King. Elena froze behind the industrial shelving unit, her fingers still wrapped around the inventory clipboard, her heart hammering so violently she was certain they would hear it. She ducked back here to count supplies during her evening shift at Translations and Brew, the quirky cafe that catered to the city's international crowd by offering menus in 30 different languages. As the head translator, she often worked late, perfecting the nuances of phrase and meaning. She'd thought she was alone in the back. She'd been catastrophically wrong. The assassination must occur during the Crimson Solstice, one of the men was saying in flawless archaic Romanian, his accent placing him somewhere in the Carpathian region, probably 5 centuries ago, when Yarden Tenebris is at his weakest. Paying homage to the old blood rituals, security will be ceremonial rather than practical. Elena's mind raced. She'd studied Romanian during her linguistics degree, had become fascinated by its evolution from Latin, had even specialized in the medieval dialects that almost nobody spoke anymore. These men had no idea anyone in this modern American city could understand them. "The wolfsbane laced silver will ensure he doesn't heal," another assassin added, this one's voice rougher, older. "We've waited 300 years for the Tenebris line to show weakness. Lord Corvinus will finally claim his rightful place as king." The third man laughed, cold and sharp. "And the girl who works here? The one who makes those little translation cards?" Elena's blood turned to ice. Collateral damage if necessary, though I doubt she understood anything. Americans barely speak their own language, let alone ours. The men moved toward the stockroom exit, their footsteps echoing. Elena pressed herself against the cold wall, praying the shadows would swallow her whole. She waited until their voices faded completely, until the cafe's front door chimed their departure, until her legs stopped shaking enough to support her weight. She should call the police. Except what would she say? She'd overheard men speaking medieval Romanian about assassinating someone called the Vampire King. They'd think she was insane. She'd sound insane. But Elena had always possessed a peculiar instinct about truth. Languages were her life, because words mattered, because the difference between dialects could mean the difference between poetry and insult, between peace and war. Those men had been absolutely serious. The weapons they'd described were specific. The timeline was exact. Somewhere in this city, someone named Yarden Tenebris was going to die in 3 days unless she did something. She locked up the cafe with trembling hands, her mind already spinning through possibilities. She'd research first. If there really was a vampire king and god, even thinking it made her feel ridiculous, there had to be evidence. Secret societies left traces. Powerful people had patterns. Her apartment was a 15-minute walk through downtown, past the gleaming skyscrapers that touched the autumn sky, past the old cathedral with its Gothic spires, past the underground station where steam rose from grates like breath from the city's hidden mouth. She barely noticed any of it, her thoughts consumed by archaic verb conjugations and the specific way the oldest assassin had pronounced Tenebris, with the soft Latin inflection that predated modern Romanian entirely. 3 hours later, surrounded by her laptop, scattered books, and enough coffee to fuel a small army, Elena had found him. Yarden Tenebris wasn't hiding. He was the owner of Tenebris Holdings, a massive corporate empire with investments in pharmaceuticals, real estate, and curiously, blood banks. His official biography was sparse Eastern European descent, relocated to the States 50 years ago, notoriously private. But the photographs made Elena's breath catch. He was devastatingly beautiful in the way that ancient marble statues were beautiful, all sharp angles and aristocratic features, with hair so pale it looked like spun silver and skin like porcelain that had never seen sunlight. His eyes in the photos were an unusual shade of amber gray, penetrating and intelligent. He looked perhaps 30, though something about the set of his shoulders, the way he carried himself even in still images, suggested incalculable age. The society pages mentioned his Crimson Solstice Gala, an annual charity event held at his private estate on the outskirts of the city. Invitation only. Black tie. Scheduled for exactly 3 days from now, Elena sat back, her pulse racing. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. She should forget everything she'd heard, go back to conjugating verbs and perfecting her Mandarin pronunciation, and living her normal, safe, non-supernatural life, except she couldn't, because if she was right, a man would die, and if she was wrong, she'd simply seem like a concerned citizen reporting a potential threat. She picked up her phone before she could talk herself out of it. Finding a contact number for Tenebris Holdings was easy. Getting past the layers of secretaries and assistants at 11 o'clock at night was decidedly not. "I need to speak with Mr. Tenebris immediately," Elena said for the 4th time, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "It's about a credible threat to his life." "Mr. Tenebris receives numerous threats," the cool female voice on the other end replied. "All security concerns are handled by our protection division. I can transfer you to. They're planning to use wolfsbane laced silver during the Crimson Solstice when he's paying homage to old blood rituals." Elena blurted out in rapid Romanian, the medieval dialect flowing from her tongue. "Lord Corvinus is behind it." "They're counting on ceremonial security rather than practical measures." The silence on the other end stretched so long Elena thought the connection had dropped. Then, in flawless medieval Romanian that matched Elena's dialect perfectly, the woman said, "Hold the line." Elena's apartment intercom buzzed exactly 12 minutes later. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound made her jump so hard she spilled her now cold coffee across her notes. Through the grainy video feed, she could see a woman in an immaculate black suit standing in the building's entrance, her posture military straight. "Miss Wright, my name is Saskia. I represent Mr. Tenebris. He requests your immediate presence." "It's almost midnight," Elena said, her finger hovering over the door release button. "Mr. Tenebris keeps irregular hours. A car is waiting." Every instinct Elena possessed screamed that she shouldn't get into a strange car at midnight to meet a man who might or might not be a vampire king. But she'd started this. And something in Saskia's voice, that absolute certainty, that unspoken urgency, told Elena that her warning had been taken very seriously indeed. She grabbed her jacket and went downstairs. The car was a sleek black vehicle with windows so heavily tinted they seemed to absorb light. Saskia held the door open with practiced efficiency, and Elena slid into leather seats that probably cost more than her annual salary. The interior smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something faintly metallic that she couldn't quite place. They drove out of the city center, toward the hills, where old money kept its estates hidden behind stone walls and ancient trees. Elena watched the city lights fade behind them, replaced by darkness, punctuated only by the occasional mansion gate. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm, as if she'd already stepped past the point of no return, and all she could do now was see where the path led. The Tenebris estate revealed itself gradually, first the massive iron gates that swung open at their approach, then the long drive lined with trees that had been growing for centuries, finally the house itself. Except house was a wholly inadequate word. It was a Gothic masterpiece of stone and stained glass, a castle transported from medieval Europe and reconstructed with absolute precision. Towers reached toward the star-scattered sky. Gargoyles perched on corners. Light spilled from tall, narrow windows in warm golden pools. It was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever seen. Saskia led her through doors that belonged in a cathedral. Across the entrance hall, with a floor of black and white marble, arranged in complex geometric patterns, up a sweeping staircase where portraits of pale, regal figures watched their passage with knowing eyes. Everything was luxurious, yet somehow austere. Beautiful, but intimidating. They stopped before an ornate door, carved with symbols Elena recognized from her study's old vampire sigils, representing bloodlines and power. Saskia knocked once, a specific rhythm, then opened the door and stepped aside. "Good luck!" "Miss Wright," she said quietly. The room beyond was a library that belonged in fairy tales, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books in a dozen languages, rolling ladders, comfortable leather furniture arranged before a fireplace where flames danced and cast moving shadows. But Elena barely noticed the decor, because her attention was consumed entirely by the man standing by the window. Yarden Tenebris was even more arresting in person than in photographs. He stood with absolute stillness, the kind of motionlessness that humans couldn't quite achieve, wearing a dark suit that looked tailored specifically for his tall, lean frame. His hair caught the firelight, turning it to liquid silver, and when he turned to face her, his eyes were the color of winter storms. "Miss Wright," he said, and his voice was like smoke and whiskey, accented with layers of time and distance. "You speak medieval Romanian with remarkable fluency, and you bring warnings of assassination from Lord Corvinus, a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in this city for over 200 years. Elena's mouth went dry. "Then you know he's real. That this is real." "Oh, I know Corvinus is very real. He's been trying to kill me in various creative ways since 1743. Yarden moved closer, each step deliberate and predatory. "What I don't know is how a translator from Translations and Brew came to overhear assassination plans spoken in a dead dialect, or why you chose to bring this information to me rather than simply pretending you'd heard nothing." He was close now, close enough that Elena could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way his skin seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. Close enough that she could smell something intoxicating and dangerous, like winter night and spices from centuries past. "I couldn't just let them kill you," Elena said, lifting her chin despite the way her heart was racing. "I don't care if you're human or vampire or something else entirely. Murder is murder, and I wasn't going to be complicit through silence." Something flickered in Yarden's eyes, surprise perhaps, or respect. Most humans who discover our existence respond with fear or greed. You respond with linguistics and moral clarity. Most vampires who get warned about assassination attempts probably don't interrogate the messenger, Elena shot back. "Are you going to take precautions or not?" Yarden laughed, a sound like dark velvet. "Oh, I'm going to take precautions. Quite drastic ones, actually." He circled around her slowly, assessing. "The problem, Miss Wright, is that you've put yourself in tremendous danger. Corvinus's assassins will realize their conversation was overheard. They'll come for you." The fear Elena had been suppressing rushed back in a cold wave. "I didn't tell them I understood. They were speaking Romanian. They thought no one in America would comprehend, but you did. And when their plot fails, which it will now that I'm warned, they'll investigate every possible leak. They're thorough, they're patient, and they're utterly ruthless." Yarden stopped directly in front of her. "You've saved my life, Elena Wright. Now I need to save yours. How? By making you untouchable. By placing you under the protection of the most powerful vampire in this territory." His eyes held hers, intense and unreadable. "By making you my queen." Elena's brain stuttered to a complete halt. "I'm sorry, what? The Crimson Solstice isn't just a gala. It's a ceremony where the vampire nobility reaffirm bloodlines and alliances. If I announce you as my chosen queen, my consort, no vampire in my territory would dare harm you. It would be a declaration of war. That's insane," Elena managed. "We just met. I'm human. I don't know anything about vampire politics, or you know enough to save my life. You know languages that even most vampires have forgotten. You have courage and integrity." Yarden's expression softened slightly. "I'm not proposing a real marriage, Elena. This would be a performance, a political maneuver to keep you alive until Corvinus and his conspirators are dealt with. After that, you can return to your life with appropriate compensation for your trouble." It was completely crazy, except it also made a terrible kind of sense. Elena had stumbled into a supernatural power struggle, and she was hopelessly out of her depth. Without protection, she was a liability that Corvinus would eliminate without hesitation. "How long?" she asked. "A few months at most. Long enough to solidify the appearance of our bond. Long enough for me to root out and eliminate the conspiracy. And I'd have to live here? Pretend to be your queen? Yes. You'd have your own quarters, your own staff. Complete safety. I would make no demands on you beyond public appearances." Elena looked around the magnificent library, then back at the vampire king who was offering her protection wrapped in performance. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But the part of her that had studied languages because she believed in communication across impossible divides, the part that had walked into danger tonight because staying silent felt wrong, that part was already leaning toward yes. "I want your word," she said finally. "Your word that this is temporary, that I'm free to leave once the threat is resolved, and that you won't hurt me." Yarden placed his hand over his heart in a gesture that looked ancient and formal. "On my bloodline and crown, I swear you will come to no harm through me. And you will have your freedom when this is finished. Then I accept." Something flashed in Yarden's eyes, relief maybe, or satisfaction. He extended his hand, and when Elena took it, his skin was cool and smooth, his grip firm. "Welcome to the court, Elena Wright. We have 3 days to prepare you for the most important performance of your life." Those 3 days passed in a blur of overwhelming information and impossible luxury. Elena's apartment became a distant memory as she was installed in a suite of rooms that could have housed her entire building's floor. Everything was beautiful and vaguely intimidating antique furniture, artwork that belonged in museums, windows that overlooked gardens where night-blooming flowers released intoxicating scents into the darkness. Saskia became her constant companion and teacher, drilling her on vampire etiquette and hierarchy with relentless patience. Elena learned that vampires organized themselves into ancient bloodlines, each with specific powers and territories. The Tenebris line was the oldest, the most powerful, and had held the crown of this region for over a millennium. But power was always contested, always fragile. Corvinus was a lieutenant under Yarden's father, Saskia explained during one of their marathon tutorial sessions. When the crown passed to Yarden 3 centuries ago, Corvinus expected to be named as heir. Instead, Yarden claimed sole rulership. Corvinus has nursed his grudge ever since. Why now? Elena asked. Why wait 300 years? The Crimson Solstice ritual requires the king to temporarily lower his defenses, to make himself vulnerable as an act of faith and renewal. It's tradition, sacred. Corvinus is using that sacred trust as a weapon. Elena absorbed this, adding it to the growing list of vampire customs that seemed equal parts beautiful and terrifying. She learned how to address nobility, how to navigate conversations laden with double meanings, how to move and speak, and hold herself like someone who belonged at a vampire king's side. Yarden himself appeared periodically throughout her crash course in vampiric politics. He'd sweep into her rooms unannounced, observe her lessons with those penetrating storm-gray eyes, occasionally correct Saskia's instruction with details only someone of his age and power would know. The Corvinus line will be represented by his daughter Magdalena, he told Elena on the second evening, when Saskia was teaching her the formal greeting protocols. She's vicious and ambitious. She'll test you immediately. How do I handle that? Elena asked. Yarden studied her for a long moment. By remembering that you speak languages she's forgotten, that you possess knowledge that predates her arrogance, and that you chose courage over safety. Don't pretend to be what you're not. Be exactly who you are. That's more formidable than any performance. His faith in her, unearned and unexpected, made something warm bloom in Elena's chest. The night before the Crimson Solstice, Elena couldn't sleep. She paced her luxurious rooms, practicing conversational gambits in her head, trying not to think about how spectacularly this could all go wrong. Around midnight, she gave up on rest entirely and wandered out into the corridor, drawn by the sound of music coming from somewhere below. She followed the haunting melody through hallways lit by candles in iron sconces, down a different staircase than she'd learned, until she found herself in a ballroom that looked like it had been transported whole from a Renaissance palace. And there, in the center of the empty dance floor, was Yarden. He moved through what Elena recognized as an ancient sword form, his movements precise and deadly beautiful. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a white shirt and dark trousers, and the candlelight caught on his silver hair as he spun and struck at invisible opponents. He was mesmerizing power and grace combined into something that transcended simple combat. Elena must have made some sound, because Yarden stopped mid-strike and turned to face her. Can't sleep, he asked, not even slightly winded despite the athletic intensity of his practice. Too much in my head, Elena admitted. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding. This is your home now, temporary though it may be. Yarden lowered his practice sword and walked toward her. I should be the one apologizing. I've turned your life completely upside down. I turned it upside down when I decided to eavesdrop on assassins, Elena said, managing a small laugh. You're just helping me survive the consequences. Yarden's expression grew serious. Tomorrow will be challenging. The nobility will question our bond, will look for any weakness. We need to present absolute unity. I know. Saskia's drilled that into me thoroughly. I don't just mean politically. Yarden hesitated, a surprising show of uncertainty from someone so powerful. We'll need to demonstrate physical comfort with each other. I'll need to touch your hand, your waist, perhaps your face. I wanted your explicit permission. The thoughtfulness of it, the careful respect, made Elena's throat tight. I appreciate you asking. Yes, you have my permission. I trust you. Something shifted in Yarden's eyes at those last 3 words. You shouldn't. You barely know me. I know you've been nothing but honorable. I know you could have just killed me to eliminate the risk I represent, but instead, you're protecting me. I know you practice sword forms in empty ballrooms at midnight like you're remembering battles from centuries past. Elena stepped closer. That's enough to trust, I think. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Something electric and undefined sparking in the space between them. Then Yarden extended his hand. Dance with me, he said softly. Let's practice being comfortable together. There was no music anymore. But Elena placed her hand in his and let him draw her onto the ballroom floor. His other hand settled at her waist, cool through the thin fabric of her sleep clothes, and they began to move. Yarden led with effortless confidence, sweeping her through patterns that her body somehow remembered despite never having learned them. You're a natural, Yarden murmured, his breath ghosting across her temple, or you're an exceptional partner. They danced until Elena's nervousness faded, until moving together felt natural, until the intimacy of his nearness became familiar rather than overwhelming. When they finally stopped, Yarden's hand lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. You're going to be magnificent tomorrow, he said quietly. Elena went to bed with those words warming her chest and slept dreamlessly until Saskia arrived before dawn to begin preparations. The transformation took hours. Elena was bathed in water scattered with night-blooming flowers, her skin treated with oils that smelled of winter roses and something darker, earthier. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that managed to be both elegant and slightly wild, with small crystals woven through the dark strands, and the dress god, the dress. It was the deep red of arterial blood, crafted from silk so fine it seemed to float rather than hang. The bodice fit perfectly, the neckline gracefully cut to reveal her collarbones and the curve of her shoulders. The skirt fell in elegant folds to the floor, with a slit that allowed freedom of movement. When Elena looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized the woman, staring back regal, striking, almost otherworldly. "Perfect," Saskia said with satisfaction. "You look like a queen! I look terrified!" Elena corrected. Queens are allowed to be terrified. They're just not allowed to show it. Saskia adjusted one final crystal in Elena's hair. Master Yarden is waiting in the portrait gallery. Elena found him standing before a massive painting of a dark-haired man who shared Yarden's aristocratic features, his father, she assumed. Yarden wore full formal regalia, a jacket of midnight black embroidered with silver thread in patterns that hurt to look at directly, an ancient medallion at his throat marking him as king. His hair was pulled back, emphasizing the sharp beauty of his face. He turned when he heard her approach, and the expression that crossed his features made Elena's breath catch. It wasn't the calculated interest of someone appraising his fake queen. It was something raw and genuine, quickly masked but unmistakable. "Elena," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "You're breathtaking. So are you," she replied honestly. Yarden crossed to her and lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with old-world formality, but his eyes never left hers, and the cool touch of his mouth against her skin sent electricity racing up her arm. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No, but let's do this anyway." The Crimson Solstice ceremony was being held in the estate's grand hall, a space Elena hadn't seen before. When the massive doors swung open and she walked in on Yarden's arm, she understood why. The hall was a Gothic masterpiece, vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadow, stained glass windows depicting vampire history, a floor of polished obsidian that reflected candlelight like a dark mirror. And filling that magnificent space were vampires, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, all pale and beautiful, and watching with eyes that ranged from ruby to amber to ice blue. The women wore gowns that would have been fashionable in every century from the Renaissance onward. The men's clothing spanned the same impossible timeline. They all possessed that supernatural stillness, that predatory grace that marked them as decidedly other. Elena's fingers tightened on Yarden's arm, and his hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of reassurance. They walked the length of the hall toward a dais where two throne-like chairs waited. Every step felt like miles. Elena could feel the weight of those ancient gazes, could sense the calculation and assessment happening all around them. She kept her chin up, her expression serene, the way Saskia had taught her. Yarden settled into his throne with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this countless times. Elena took the seat beside him, the queen's throne, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go spectacularly wrong. "My honored subjects," Yarden's voice rang out, commanding immediate silence. "I welcome you to the Crimson Solstice. Tonight we honor the old ways, renew our bonds, and celebrate the strength of our bloodlines." The formal words washed over Elena as she scanned the crowd. She was looking for the assassins she'd overheard, but they were nowhere visible. Of course they wouldn't be. They'd be hidden, waiting for the moment of vulnerability. "This year," Yarden continued, and Elena heard the subtle shift in his tone, "I have a special announcement. I have chosen a queen." The reaction was immediate whispers spreading like wildfire, shock and speculation rippling through the assembled vampires. Yarden reached for Elena's hand, drawing her to her feet beside him. "This is Elena Wright. She is brilliant, courageous, and she has won my heart completely. I claim her as my consort and place her under the absolute protection of the Tenebris line." A woman emerged from the crowd, and Elena knew immediately this was Magdalena Corvinus. She was stunning in a venomous way, with hair like spilled ink and eyes the color of old blood. Her smile was all sharp edges. "How fascinating," Magdalena purred, her accent placing her somewhere in Eastern Europe, her words laced with mockery. "The great Yarden Tenebris, who has rejected consorts for 3 centuries, suddenly produces a human queen days before the Crimson Solstice." One might think this was a strategic move rather than a love match. Elena felt Yarden tense beside her, but she spoke before he could respond, switching smoothly to medieval Romanian, the same dialect Magdalena's father and his assassins had used. One might also think that jealousy makes people see conspiracy where there is only happiness, Elena said sweetly. But then, the Corvinus line has always been prone to paranoia and poor timing, haven't they? The crowd went utterly silent. Magdalena's eyes widened in genuine shock, then narrowed dangerously. You speak the old tongue. I speak many tongues, including the language of ambitious fools who plot murder in supposedly dead dialects, thinking themselves safe from discovery. Elena held Magdalena's gaze steadily. Your father's plans are known, his assassins are identified, and his centuries of failure will continue for centuries more. Magdalena's face transformed with rage, but before she could respond, Yarden's hand tightened on Elena's, and his voice cut through the tension like a blade. Corvinus, show yourself, or prove yourself the coward we all know you to be. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then an older vampire emerged from the back of the hall, pale as death, with eyes like frozen blood and an expression of absolute hatred. This was a creature who had nursed his grudge for 300 years, who had plotted and waited and let resentment poison everything he touched. You dare accuse me in open court? Corvinus snarled. I dare because I have proof, because your assassins spoke freely of your plans, never imagining that anyone could understand them. Because my Queen Yarden pulled Elena closer, his arm sliding around her waist in a possessive protective gesture, is too clever for you, too brave for you, and too good for you to have ever anticipated. Corvinus drew a weapon from beneath his formal jacket, a silver blade that gleamed with an oily sheen. Wolfsbane, the exact weapon the assassins had mentioned. Vampires in the crowd gasped and drew back. If you want your crown so badly, Yarden said quietly, his voice deadly calm, challenge me properly. Honor duel. First blood or submission. I'll settle for your death. Corvinus spat and lunged. What happened next unfolded with the terrible speed of supernatural combat. Yarden moved faster than Elena's eyes could fully follow, drawing his own blade, the practiced sword from the ballroom, transformed into a true weapon. Silver clashed against silver, the sound ringing through the hall like bells. Corvinus was fast and vicious. But Yarden fought with the skill of someone who'd been perfecting his art for over a millennium. They moved across the obsidian floor in a deadly dance, their blades leaving trails of light in the candlelit darkness. Elena's heart was in her throat, her fists clenched so hard her nails drew blood from her palms. Then Corvinus made his mistake. He overextended on a thrust, leaving his side exposed for just a fraction of a second. Yarden's blade flashed, opening a deep cut from shoulder to ribs. Corvinus staggered back, silver-laced blood spilling onto the black floor. Yield, Yarden commanded. Corvinus looked at his daughter, at the assembled nobility, at the centuries of ambition crumbling before him. Then, with a sound of pure fury, he lunged again not at Yarden, but at Elena. He was fast, supernaturally so, crossing the distance between them in an eye blink. Elena barely had time to register the blade aimed at her heart before Yarden materialized between them. The silver blade meant for Elena's chest plunged into Yarden's shoulder instead, sinking deep, the wolfsbane immediately spreading dark veins beneath his skin. Yarden didn't even flinch. His hand closed around Corvinus's throat, lifting the older vampire off his feet. You violated honor combat. You attacked my queen. You forfeited not just this duel, but your life. With casual, terrifying strength, Yarden snapped Corvinus's neck. The body crumpled to the obsidian floor, and though he wasn't permanently dead, vampires didn't die that easily. He'd be unconscious for hours. Remove him, Yarden ordered, and several vampires rushed forward to drag Corvinus away. Then he turned to Magdalena. Your father's actions aren't your sin, but if you follow his path, you'll share his fate. Choose wisely. Magdalena looked at her father's unconscious form, at Yarden's absolute dominance, at Elena standing safe behind the vampire king. Something calculating crossed her features, then she sank into a deep curtsy. I recognize your crown and your queen, my lord. The Corvinus line will cause you no further trouble. It was a surrender, complete and public. Yarden nodded acceptance, then turned to Elena. The wolfsbane was spreading across his shoulder and chest, ugly dark veins radiating from the wound. His skin had gone even paler, and there was pain in his eyes, though he was hiding it admirably. We need to get you help, Elena said urgently. The ceremony must finish first, Yarden replied quietly. Tradition demands it. He was right. The assembled vampires were watching, waiting to see how their king would handle being wounded. Any sign of weakness now could inspire new challenges. Elena understood in that moment exactly what being queen meant, not just standing beside power, but supporting it when it faltered. She stepped forward, deliberately invading Yarden's space, and reached up to cup his face with both hands. Then let's finish it together. She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't part of any script they'd rehearsed. It was pure instinct, a desire to give him strength, to show the court that their bond was real and unshakable. Yarden went utterly still for half a heartbeat, then his uninjured arm wrapped around her waist, and he kissed her back with surprising tenderness. When they broke apart, Elena could see genuine emotion in his eyes, surprise, and something warmer, something that made her breath catch. "My queen," he murmured, "just for her." Then he turned to address the court once more, his voice strong despite the poison spreading through his system. "The Crimson Solstice is hereby concluded. I thank you all for witnessing the dawn of a new era for the Tenebris line." The moment the formal words were complete, Yarden's legs buckled. Elena caught him as best she could, though he was far too heavy for her to truly support. Saskia appeared from somewhere in the crowd, along with several other vampires who helped guide their king toward a side exit. They brought him to a room Elena hadn't seen before, something between a medical facility and an alchemist's laboratory, all glass bottles and ancient equipment. A vampire who introduced himself as Dr. Theron immediately began working on Yarden's wound, extracting the silver and treating the wolfsbane poisoning with efficiency born of long practice. "He'll be fine," Theron assured Elena when he saw her terrified expression. "He's the Tenebris king. It takes more than this to kill him." But watching Yarden lying pale and still on the medical table, dark veins slowly fading from his skin, Elena felt something crack open in her chest. When had this stopped being a performance? When had her concern become real, her protectiveness genuine? When had she started falling for the vampire king who'd turned her world upside down? It was dawn before Theron declared Yarden stable, and Elena was finally allowed back into his room. He was awake, propped against pillows, still too pale but alert. His eyes found her immediately when she entered. "You kissed me," he said without preamble. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was selling the performance, making sure the court believed us." "That wasn't a performance, Elena." "Don't insult us both by pretending it was." She could have deflected, could have maintained the comfortable fiction that this was all temporary and meaningless. Instead, she crossed to his bedside and sat carefully on the edge of the mattress. "You're right," she said quietly. "It wasn't. And I don't know when this stopped being fake, but somewhere between midnight dances and you taking a blade meant for me, I started actually caring about you." Yarden reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "I knew the moment I saw you standing in my library, terrified but determined, speaking languages that most vampires have forgotten. You were extraordinary, and I wanted to know everything about you." "That was 3 days ago," Elena pointed out. "I'm over 1,000 years old. I know what matters when I find it." His hand cupped her cheek. "Elena Wright, I asked you to be my queen as a protection. I'm asking now if you'll consider staying as my partner, my equal, my love." The question hung in the air between them, massive and impossible. Elena thought about her small apartment, her simple life translating menus and conjugating verbs. She thought about ancient libraries and midnight dances and a vampire king who fought with honor and treated her with respect. She thought about how alive she felt in this world of danger and beauty. "I barely know anything about being a vampire queen," she said. "You learned enough in 3 days to save my kingdom. Imagine what you could do with centuries." Yarden's thumb traced her cheekbone. "I'm not asking you to decide now. Stay a while. Learn. Let this be real, and see where it leads." Elena leaned down and kissed him softly, tasting possibility and promise. "Okay," she whispered against his lips. "Let's see where this leads." Over the following weeks, Elena discovered what it truly meant to exist in the vampire world. The court accepted her more readily once they saw how Yarden looked at her not as a political prop, but as someone genuinely cherished. She continued her translation work, but now she was documenting ancient vampire texts, preserving histories that existed nowhere else. She learned vampire customs and laws, became a bridge between the modern human world and the ancient supernatural one, and she fell deeper in love with Yarden with every passing day. He courted her properly, with old-world romance that took her breath away. Midnight picnics in the estate gardens, where night-blooming flowers released their perfume. Long conversations about history and language and philosophy that stretched until dawn. Dancing in empty ballrooms, his hands sure and reverent on her waist, he showed her his world with patience and care, never pushing, always giving her space to adjust. But it wasn't just romance. They worked together, Yarden governing his territory with Elena at his side, her modern perspective balancing his centuries of experience. She negotiated with visiting vampire delegations, her linguistic skills making her invaluable in delicate political situations. She helped reform outdated customs, pushing for changes that would help vampires integrate more safely with the modern world. 2 months after the Crimson Solstice, on a night when snow was falling softly outside the library windows, Yarden brought Elena to stand before the portrait of his father. I was terrified when he died, Yarden said quietly. I was barely 300 years old, and suddenly I was responsible for an entire territory. I've made countless mistakes, fought endless challenges, survived more assassination attempts than I can count, and through all of it, I've been alone. He turned to face Elena, taking both her hands in his. You're the first person in 1,000 years who's made me feel like I don't have to carry everything by myself. You're brilliant and brave, and you challenge me in ways I desperately needed. I love you, Elena Wright. Not because you saved my life, but because you've made my life worth living. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too. I never imagined I'd fall for a vampire king, but here we are. Here we are, Yarden echoed, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. I have something to ask you. He pulled a ring from his pocket, not flashy or ostentatious, but elegant and beautiful, an antique band of white gold with a single perfect diamond, surrounded by smaller rubies the color of blood. This was my mother's ring. She wore it for 5 centuries as my father's queen. Yarden took a breath, unnecessary for him but significant in its humanity. Elena, will you be my queen? Not as a performance or protection, but as my true partner, my consort, my wife. Joy bubbled up in Elena's chest, bright and overwhelming. Yes, absolutely yes. Yarden slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. Then he was kissing her again, deeper this time, conveying without words everything he felt. When they finally broke apart, Elena laughed. I'm going to need to learn a lot more about vampire marriage customs, aren't I? We have forever for you to learn, Yarden said, smiling in a way that made him look young and unburdened. Literal forever, if you choose. When you're ready, I can turn you. You could be vampire live centuries at my side, but there's no pressure, no timeline. Human or vampire, I want you exactly as you are. The offer hung between them, enormous and impossible. Elena thought about mortality and eternity, about remaining human in a vampire world or becoming something other. It wasn't a decision to make lightly, and she was grateful Yarden understood that. Let me think about it, she said. For now, I just want to be engaged to you, plan our wedding, and help you run your kingdom. That sounds perfect. Their wedding took place on the spring equinox, 6 months after Elena had first overheard assassins plotting in medieval Romanian. The ceremony blended human and vampire traditions, a human officiant conducting the formal vows, while ancient vampire rituals wove through the proceedings, binding them together in ways that transcended simple legal marriage. Elena wore a gown of ivory silk, embroidered with silver thread, her dark hair crowned with crystals that caught the candlelight. Yarden wore formal black, looking every inch the vampire king, his silver hair loose around his shoulders. When they exchanged vows before a gathering of both vampires and carefully selected humans, Elena's family and friends, thrilled by her fairy tale romance with the mysterious billionaire, there wasn't a dry eye in the estate's chapel. I never believed in fate, Yarden said during his vows, his voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. In 1,000 years, I've seen too much chaos and coincidence to think the universe has a plan. But then you walked into my library, speaking languages that shouldn't exist, offering warnings you had no reason to give, and I've realized that sometimes the universe does get it right. Elena's own vows were simpler but no less heartfelt. You showed me a world I never knew existed. You treated me with respect when you could have treated me with suspicion. You made me your queen when you could have just protected me from the shadows. You gave me a choice in everything, and I choose you. Today, tomorrow, and for as long as we have. When the officiant pronounced them married and Yarden kissed her, Elena felt the completion of a journey that had started with broken glass and whispered assassination plans. She'd stumbled into danger and found love. She'd offered a warning and received a kingdom. She'd been a translator, and now she was a queen. The reception lasted until dawn, vampire and human guests mingling in ways that would have been impossible before Elena's integration of the two worlds. She danced with Yarden, with her father, with Saskia, who had become a true friend, with various vampire nobles who had learned to respect the human queen who spoke their forgotten languages. As the first hint of sunrise painted the horizon, Yarden led Elena away from the celebration, up to the highest tower of the estate. From there, they could see the city sprawling below, lights beginning to wink out as dawn approached. We should get you inside, Elena said, mindful of Yarden's sensitivity to sunlight. I have a few minutes yet. Yarden wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. I wanted to watch the sunrise with my wife. Wife. The word sent a thrill through Elena every time she heard it. Tell me about the future, she said softly. What happens now? Now we govern together. We continue reforming the vampire world, making it safer and more just. We negotiate peace with other territories. We preserve histories and build new traditions. Yarden's arms tightened around her, and we love each other. Through every challenge and triumph, we do it together. That sounds perfect. Elena paused, then took a breath and voiced the decision she'd been considering for weeks. Yarden, I want you to turn me. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I want forever with you. All the centuries we can have. She felt him go utterly still behind her. Are you certain? It's irreversible. You'd lose your humanity, your mortality. I'd gain everything that matters. Elena turned in his arms to face him. My humanity isn't about my biology. It's about how I choose to live, how I treat people, what I value. Those things don't change just because my body does. And I want to stand beside you not just for years, but for centuries. I want to learn and grow and build with you. I want forever. Yarden's eyes were bright with emotion. We'll do it properly then, with ritual and preparation, with full understanding of what you're choosing. And Elena, his hand cupped her face tenderly. I will spend every day of our eternity making sure you never regret this choice. I won't, she said with absolute certainty. I've never been more sure of anything. They kissed as the sun finally broke over the horizon, forcing Yarden to retreat into the tower's shadows. But Elena stayed a moment longer, watching the light spread across the city, across the world she was choosing to leave behind, across the future that was opening before her. 6 months later, on another Crimson Solstice, Elena Wright became Elena Tenebris in truth. The transformation was overseen by Dr. Theron, with Yarden never leaving her side through the 3 days of change. When she woke as a vampire, the world was different, sharper, clearer, filled with colors and sounds she'd never perceived before. She was stronger, faster, and would never age another day, but the core of who she was remained unchanged. She still loved languages, still saw her role as bridge builder between worlds, still approached problems with the same logical creativity that had saved Yarden's life. She was still Elena, just more so. How do you feel? Yarden asked when she sat up on the 4th day, fully transitioned. Elena considered the question seriously. She felt powerful and alive and fundamentally herself. She felt ready for whatever came next. Like I'm home, she said simply. Over the following decades, Elena proved to be exactly the queen the vampire world needed. She modernized their systems while respecting their traditions. She opened diplomatic channels with other supernatural communities. She documented vampire history with a scholar's precision, preserving knowledge that would have otherwise been lost. And she loved Yarden with a devotion that became legendary in vampire circles, proof that even immortal hearts could find their perfect match. They faced challenges together, rival vampires who tested their rule, human governments that discovered the supernatural world, internal reforms that required delicate navigation. But they faced everything as partners, as equals, as two halves of a perfectly matched whole. 50 years after their first meeting, Elena stood in the same library where Yarden had first offered her protection. So much had changed. Yet this room remained constant, still filled with books in a dozen languages, still warmed by a fire in the hearth, still a sanctuary of knowledge and peace. Yarden found her there, as he so often did, and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind in a gesture that had become their habit. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About the night I overheard those assassins," Elena said, leaning back into his embrace. "About how terrified I was, how I almost talked myself out of warning you. I'm eternally grateful you didn't. Me too." Elena turned in his arms, looking up at the vampire who was her husband, her partner, her king. "Everything I have, everything I am, started with that choice. To speak up, to get involved, to care enough to act. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it," Yarden said, his forehead resting against hers. "I love you, Elena. Today, tomorrow, forever, forever," Elena echoed, and kissed him with all the passion and certainty that came from knowing they had literally forever to love each other. Outside the library windows, night was falling over the city, bringing with it all the beauty and danger of the vampire world. But inside, in each other's arms, Elena and Yarden had found something rarer than power or immortality. They'd found partnership. They'd found understanding. They'd found home. And that, Elena thought as Yarden's lips found hers again, was worth more than all the centuries in the world. The story that had begun with broken glass and whispered conspiracy had transformed into a love that would endure through ages. Elena, who had once been just a translator in a cafe, was now the beloved queen of the vampire world, ruling with wisdom and compassion beside a king who cherished her completely. The threat that had brought them together was long defeated. The performance that had protected her had become the truest thing in both their lives. They had forever, and they intended to spend every moment of it together, facing down challenges, building new traditions, and loving each other with the kind of devotion that transcended species, mortality, and time itself. In the end, Elena's decision to speak up about what she'd overheard had saved more than just Yarden's life. It had saved them both, giving Elena a purpose and passion she'd never imagined, giving Yarden the partner and love he'd spent a millennium searching for without knowing he was searching. Fate, Yarden had once said, wasn't something he believed in. But looking at their life together, at everything they'd built and become, Elena knew better. Sometimes the universe did get it right. Sometimes a chance overheard conversation could change everything. Sometimes a poor translator could become a vampire queen and find true love in the process. And sometimes, just sometimes, happily ever after wasn't just a fairy tale ending, it was the beginning of forever. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new adventures, new challenges, new joys. Elena and Yarden traveled the world, visiting other vampire territories and building alliances. They welcomed new vampires into their court. Many of them turned at their own request after seeing the love and partnership that the king and queen shared. They modernized the estate while preserving its historical beauty, creating a home that honored the past while embracing the future. Elena never stopped learning languages, adding supernatural dialects to her repertoire, the clicking sounds of shapeshifter tribes, the musical tones of fae courts, the guttural speech of ancient demons. She became the vampire world's foremost diplomat, able to negotiate with any species in their native tongue. Yarden ruled with strength and wisdom, but always consulted his queen, whose insight and perspective continued to make him a better leader. They created a library together, open to all vampires who wished to learn, filled with texts in every language from every era. It became a center of vampire scholarship, with Elena as its director, preserving their history while also documenting their evolving present. Young vampires came from across the world to study there, to learn from the queen who had once been human, who understood both worlds, and could teach them how to navigate the modern age. On their 100th anniversary, Elena and Yarden stood once again in that ballroom, where they'd first danced together, where she'd first felt the pull of something deeper than protection. The room was filled with guests celebrating the century mark of their marriage, vampires, humans, even a few other supernatural creatures who had become allies over the decades. 100 years, Elena mused, watching their guests dance. It feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once. That's immortality for you, Yarden said with a smile. Time becomes fluid, but every moment with you has been vivid, Elena. You make eternity feel alive. They danced together as they had so many times before, moving in perfect synchronization, two beings so attuned to each other that they functioned as one. Around them their court celebrated, their friends laughed, their life continued in all its complicated, beautiful, challenging glory. When the party finally ended and they retreated to their private chambers, Elena stood at the window looking out at the stars. Yarden joined her, his arms sliding around her waist in their customary embrace. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Elena thought about her human life, the simplicity she'd left behind, the mortality she'd surrendered. Then she thought about everything she'd gained love that transcended lifetimes, purpose that fulfilled her completely, adventures she could never have imagined, and a partner who made every challenge bearable and every joy sweeter. "Not a single one," she said with absolute certainty. "This life with you is everything I never knew I wanted. I never knew what I was missing until you," Yarden admitted. 1,000 years of existence, and you taught me what it meant to truly live." They stood together in comfortable silence, two immortal beings who had found in each other what they'd both been searching for. Outside, the world continued to turn, humans and vampires and countless other creatures living their lives in the complex dance of coexistence. But inside, in this moment, there was only love, pure, true, and eternal. Elena turned in Yarden's arms, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "Tell me," she murmured against his lips, "what adventure should we tackle next? What problem should we solve? What territory should we visit? What history should we preserve?" Yarden's eyes sparkled with affection and amusement. "Ever the diplomat, ever the scholar, ever moving forward. You love that about me. I love everything about you." He kissed her more deeply, conveying without words the depth of his devotion. "But for now, let's simply be. Let's celebrate what we've built, who we've become, and the miracle of finding each other." "I can do that," Elena agreed, and let herself sink into his embrace, into the peace of being exactly where she belonged. The story that had begun with danger and deception had become a love story for the ages. The translator who'd stumbled into a vampire conspiracy had become the greatest queen the supernatural world had ever known. The vampire king who'd ruled alone for centuries had found a partner who made him stronger, wiser, and infinitely happier. And in the quiet of their chambers, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Elena and Yarden held each other close and faced there forever the way they faced everything together, united and absolutely certain that they'd made the right choice all those years ago when she'd walked into his library with a warning and he'd offered her his crown. Their love had started as protection and performance. It had become partnership and passion, and it would endure through all the centuries to come a testament to the power of choice, courage, and the extraordinary things that could happen when two souls found each other against all odds. Elena Wright had saved the Vampire King's life, and in doing so, she'd found her own. They had forever, and they would spend every moment of it loving each other with the fierce devotion that had defined their relationship from the very beginning. The world outside might change, challenges might come and go, but the love between the king and queen of the vampire world would remain constant. Forever and always, they were home.